I don't think it has. It may get there. It may take time. I think if you'd asked me the question a few years ago, I'd have thought it would be quicker than it actually has been. I don't really understand why it's been slow burn. I think there are probably a number of reasons. Trustees are still quite confused, I have to say. Not all, but many are still quite confused. I think there's concerns about cost, concerns about conflicts, concerns about letting go of the reins. I actually think they should probably be more concerned about not letting go of the reins in some cases, but I think these things are what is holding a number of schemes back from even trying to understand it properly.
I think there's also the point actually of where the industry has focused and the schemes that it's actually tried to convert to fiduciary management. Because I think originally we were focusing on larger schemes and advising them to increase their governance, which a lot of them I think have taken on board in doing, but actually look to resource that in-house. And I think actually for smaller and medium-sized schemes who are probably more right to actually delegate completely, there was less focus. So I think there's been somewhat of a shift to actually focus more onto what I would call smaller and medium schemes, where they really do need the service delivered in a good way.
I think I'm close to Anne's position. It's come a long way. Back in 2008, when we entered the UK market, it really was a completely new concept, and you were largely trying to explain what fiduciary management is. When I look around the table now and see how much shared understanding there is about what it is and what it isn't, we've come a long way. Assets are growing, schemes are appointing. I think a number of schemes are sitting on the sidelines waiting to see what that will deliver. I think there are a couple of obstacles. Well, one thing that has really helped is that, in essence, the three large consultants have thrown in their old model, given up on that, and joined the fiduciary management model, have essentially joined that, and that has led to a lot of momentum, I think, in the move towards fiduciary management. I think the largest obstacle, cost, sometimes gets mentioned, but I think that's relatively easily addressed. Once you get to, you can demonstrate that purchasing power. In our case, we manage 75 billion for pension schemes. We can achieve cost levels with external managers, with custodians, etc., that easily outweigh any fees that we would be charging. The big one is
trustees don't always understand that.
I agree, and it's still raised, but I think that's the one that is relatively easily addressed. The one that is still relatively hard to address is the loss of control argument. And because that takes time to explain.
I think it's becoming a mainstream solution. That doesn't mean that everyone does it. But I think, as has been said, it certainly is on the increase. I don't think we've seen it going backwards, and I'm not sure that there's anyone that's gone for this solution has then reversed that decision. So it's a growing situation. It's becoming more accepted. It's been discussed much more. There's much more understanding, as we've said. So I think it's going to grow, but I think it does take time. Trustee boards and corporates themselves are rather conservative when it comes to this kind of adoption. And it takes quite a bit of convincing amongst a group of people to make what they think is a major change. It's not quite as major, I don't think, as people make out, but nonetheless, it does take time. So I think we're seeing it's coming into the mainstream, but it's going to take quite a bit of time for it to develop.
What's the tenor of the conversation when you talk to your fellow trustees, fellow trustee chairs about, and you're somebody who's adopted this as you're fairly early adopters.
Yes.
Is there a lot of curiosity about your experience?
Yes, a lot of curiosity. People want to know how it actually works in practice, and they're very interested in hearing views of trustees as opposed to obviously people who are promoting the solution. So yes, I mean there's a lot of interest. Equally, there are vested interests in a trustee board and a total composition against moving. Often people who have been around on a trustee board, on an investment side or an investment committee feel threatened, and they feel that they're going to lose out a lot So they have a major influence in a trustee board's decision. And so there are vested interests, I think, working against making a change. That doesn't mean, of course, you shouldn't do it.
Yeah, sure, yeah. Gwyn,
Oh, well,
mainstream or fringe?
Well, I think the ideas behind fiduciary management are now very widely accepted, and that's, as we were discussing earlier, the focus on the integrated risk management and a sort of a unified point of implementation. I think there's quite a lot of reluctance to actually embrace fiduciary management in practice, and that's often associated with the confusion over the different kinds of models available. And there's no real solution to that problem insofar as there will always be different fiduciary models available, and the challenge for trustees is to understand what they want and who can provide that the best. So in terms of whether it's becoming mainstream or whether it has become mainstream, it's certainly heading in that direction. The intellectual foundations have certainly been set. There are a variety of different models out there, and it's growing organically through time.
Mm. What about the Dutch experience? Because in Dutch and Holland, it really is. It's what would be, if we're talking about sort of 6.3% in this country, what would be the
number is probably 80 or 90% of assets. Back Holland probably. It's quite interesting from a timing perspective. In Holland, this all started after the dot-com crisis. With the regulator then stepping in as well, with more sophisticated risk management frameworks for pension funds. And so from the early 2000s onwards, you saw up to about the end of the last decade, you saw it grow quite quickly. Now, initially very similar to what we see in the UK, very, very slow rate of early adopters. And then you suddenly see the rate of adoption picking up. Interestingly, in the Netherlands, schemes are much larger. The regulator has been quite strong in it's a different regulatory environment in getting schemes to merge. And so some of the discussions were new to us coming into the UK market, where it was easily accepted for smaller schemes to, and this is where you get back to fiduciary management as being full delegation. Fiduciary management, full delegation, works for small schemes. In the Dutch market, our largest client is 30 billion sterling. By any stretch of the imagination, I think we all agree that that's not a small scheme. They have some in-house resource. And so it's not so much an outsourcing solution, but a co-sourcing solution where we work very closely with their in-house team, help them explore opportunities, bring opportunities to them, help them gain control over the total package of assets versus liabilities. So it's definitely mainstream in Holland. It was challenged during the credit crisis, but ultimately it's come through. Clearly there has been some questioning of should we really have outsourced this or delegated that? Should we pull back some control in certain areas? Is there really full transparent information to the trustee board about what's really happening in the portfolio? But it survived through the credit crisis. And that experience is something that is invaluable, actually having gone through those crises and proven itself.
So with that 30 billion scheme, where's the dividing line between what the fiduciary manager does and what the in-house does?
Relative to our other clients, they delegate relatively little in terms of decision making. Even we're in the lead and we're expected to be. This is where there's a difference between being responsible for something and being accountable for something. So we're responsible for coming up with investment strategy ideas, manager selection ideas, but the trustee board makes the final decision. And so the larger the scheme,
the less.
Well, the more it makes sense for them, and the more to have a customized governance model where there is not full delegation or much stricter controls. They also, you can imagine that a scheme that size also has very frequent meetings, has got all the expertise required to make decisions relatively quickly. But it's worked very well for them because they get to benefit from the overall scale in terms of staffing, systems, resources, expertise that we can bring to bear for them as a large pension fund.